My wife told me I'd bore her clients to death, so I stayed home from the gala. What she didn't know, I was already sitting at the head table when she walked in, next to the billionaire she'd been trying to impress for months, the man who'd been my closest friend for 12 years. My name is Lawrence Reed. I'm 53 years old, and for the past 19 years, I've been married to a woman who stopped seeing me somewhere around year 7. Not in the way that matters to most marriages, the emotional distance, the growing apart. No, Stephanie stopped seeing me the way a corporate climber stops seeing the maintenance staff. Useful once, invisible now, irrelevant to the climb. I'm an antitrust compliance expert. That's the boring way to say it. The way Stephanie would introduce me at parties before she stopped bringing me entirely. The more accurate description is this. I'm the man corporations call when they're about to do something catastrophically stupid and need someone to tell them how badly it'll end. I've advised Fortune 100 companies, testified before Senate subcommittees, and written position papers that changed federal regulatory frameworks. But to my wife, I was the guy who read too much and talked too little. She was getting ready for the annual Healthcare Leadership Gala, the crown jewel of her professional calendar. Stephanie ran the American Medical Trade Association, a lobbying powerhouse that represented every major hospital network and pharmaceutical distribution chain on the East Coast. She was good at it too. Ruthlessly good. The kind of good that required stepping on people who got in her way. I stood in the doorway of her bedroom, holding her coat. Black cashmere, the expensive kind that felt like water between your fingers. She was at her vanity, applying lipstick with the precision of a surgeon. Her dress shimmered under the lights, deep emerald that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. "You're not coming tonight," Stephanie said without looking up. It wasn't a question. "I have the invitation," I replied calmly. "Charles sent it personally." Her hand paused, just for a second, before continuing the smooth glide across her lips. "Charles Whitmore invited half of Washington. That doesn't mean you need to show up and bore everyone to death." There it was. Not angry, not emotional, just stated as fact. "I can't bore my clients with you standing there," she continued, capping the lipstick with a decisive click. "They're too important for that. You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that she had no idea who Charles Whitmore really was to me. I understood that she'd built her entire career on a foundation she'd never bothered to inspect. And I understood that tonight, that foundation was going to shift. "I'll stay home then," I said quietly, still holding her coat. She stood, did a slow turn in the mirror, admiring herself like she was already on stage. She brushed past me without taking the coat, her perfume trailing behind her like a warning nobody else could smell. "Don't wait up," Stephanie called over her shoulder. "These things run late when you're important." I watched her black town car pull away from the circular driveway, watched the red taillights disappear around the corner. Then I walked back inside, hung her coat carefully in the closet, and went upstairs to put on my tuxedo. Charles hadn't invited half of Washington. He'd invited 12 people. I was one of them. The grand ballroom at the Waterford Hotel was exactly what you'd expect. Crystal chandeliers the size of compact cars, tables draped in white linen, and enough political power concentrated in one room to shift federal healthcare policy with a handshake. Stephanie loved these events. They made her feel untouchable. I arrived through the service entrance, not because I had to, but because Charles had suggested it years ago. "Never let them see you coming, Lawrence," he told me once. "The work we do is most effective when people forget we're in the room." Security waved me through without checking credentials. The head of security, Tom Reynolds, had worked for Charles for 15 years. He nodded once as I passed. "Mr. Reed, Mr. Whitmore is already at the table." "Thank you, Tom." I made my way through the back corridors, past catering staff arranging desserts and waiters straightening bow ties. The hallway opened into a side entrance to the ballroom, partially hidden by a decorative screen. From here, I could see everything. Stephanie was already working the room. She moved like a shark through shallow water, all grace and purpose. Her dress caught the light as she laughed at something a pharmaceutical CEO said, her hand touching his arm just long enough to seem friendly without being inappropriate. She was good at this. Really good. Our daughter Amanda was there too, standing near the bar with a tight smile on her face. She wore a conservative navy dress, her firm's standard uniform for junior associates. Amanda worked at Stephanie's organization as a policy analyst, a position she'd earned but couldn't escape the shadow of. I watched her excuse herself from a conversation with one of the senior lobbyists, her shoulders tense. Benjamin, our son, stood near the main entrance in his dress uniform. He was on leave from his position as a military prosecutor of Fort Bragg, 34 years old, and carrying himself with the kind of quiet authority the military drills into you. He was scanning the room with practiced efficiency, and when his eyes found mine across the ballroom, he gave the slightest nod. He knew I'd be here. I called him 2 days ago. Charles Whitmore sat at a table near the stage, partially elevated on a platform reserved for major benefactors. At 64, he looked like what he was: old money, old power, and old enough to have seen every game played in Washington at least twice. His gray suit was impeccable, his expression pleasant but distant. The empty chair beside him was marked with a small placard. I crossed the ballroom floor, not hiding, not announcing, just walking. A few people noticed me, confusion flickering across their faces. Lawrence Reed? Here. When I reached the table, Charles stood and extended his hand. Lawrence. Right on time. Charles, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. Thank you for the invitation. Wouldn't have it any other way, he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. We have a lot to discuss tonight. I sat down, adjusting my place setting. From this vantage point, I had a clear view of the entire room. Stephanie was still networking, still performing. She hadn't seen me yet, but she would. And when she did, the first question would form in her mind, the one she should have asked years ago. Who exactly is my husband? The moment came during the reception hour, right after the opening remarks. Stephanie was in her element, holding court with 3 hospital administrators and a pharmaceutical distribution executive. She had that practiced laugh going, the one that said I'm listening, but also I'm the most interesting person here. Then her eyes swept the room, doing what she always did at these events, cataloging who mattered and who didn't. Her gaze moved past the stage, across the benefactor tables, and then stopped. Just froze. She was looking directly at me, sitting beside Charles Whitmore at the head table. Her champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. I watched the calculation happen in real time. Confusion, then recognition, then something close to panic. Charles leaned over to me. She spotted you. I see that, I said calmly. Stephanie excused herself from her group, her smile never faltering, but her stride had changed. She was moving with purpose now, cutting through the crowd toward her table. Benjamin saw it too. He shifted positions slightly, positioning himself where he could observe. She reached the edge of the platform, looking up at me with an expression I'd seen 1,000 times. The one that said we'll discuss this later, but right now, smile. Lawrence, she said, her voice carefully modulated. I didn't realize you'd be here. Charles invited me personally. I replied. We're old friends. Her eyes flicked to Charles, who gave her a polite nod. Mrs. Reed, lovely to see you again. Your husband and I go back quite a ways. Again. Stephanie's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. We've met several times, Charles said smoothly. Senate hearings, mostly. Lawrence testified on antitrust concerns in pharmaceutical distribution chains. Brilliant work. I watched her process that. Senate hearings. Testified. Brilliant work. None of it matched the narrative she'd built in her head. I see, she said carefully. Well, I should get back to my clients. Of course, Charles said. Though I should mention, Lawrence sits on my personal advisory board for healthcare policy reform. Has for 7 years now. We're announcing a new ethics initiative tonight. You'll want to hear it. Stephanie's face remained pleasant, but I knew her tells. The slight tension in her jaw, the way her fingers pressed harder against her clutch. She nodded once and walked away, her heels clicking a little too sharply against the floor. Charles watched her go. She really had no idea. None, I confirmed. That's going to make the announcement more interesting. 20 minutes later, Charles took the stage. The room quieted as he adjusted the microphone. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. As many of you know, I've spent the last decade focused on ethical reform in healthcare administration. He paused, letting that sink in. Stephanie was standing near the back with her colleagues, her attention fully locked on the stage now. Tonight, I'm announcing the formation of the Healthcare Integrity Commission, an independent oversight body that will audit trade associations, lobbying groups, and industry organizations for compliance with federal ethics standards. The room stirred. This was news. Leading this commission, Charles continued, will be someone many of you already know by reputation. Lawrence Reed has agreed to serve as Chief Compliance Officer. His first audit begins next month. Charles looked directly at the section where Stephanie stood. We'll be starting with the American Medical Trade Association. The room erupted in polite applause. I stood, acknowledged it with a brief nod, and sat back down. Across the ballroom, Stephanie stood perfectly still, her face frozen in a smile that no longer reached her eyes. Benjamin caught my eye from across the room and gave the smallest nod of approval. Amanda, standing near the bar, looked stunned but something else too. Relieved, maybe, like she'd been waiting for this. Charles leaned over as the applause died down. Your wife looks like she just swallowed glass. She'll be fine, I said quietly, at least until tomorrow morning. Because tomorrow morning, her lawyer would call, and that's when everything would really start to fall apart. My phone rang at 6:47 a.m. I was already awake, sitting in the study of our house with a cup of coffee and a file folder I'd been maintaining for 3 years. Stephanie hadn't come home until after 2. I'd heard her heels on the marble floor, heard her pause outside the study door, then continue upstairs. We hadn't spoken. The caller ID showed Eric Palmer, the firm's senior legal counsel. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Eric, I said calmly. Lawrence. His voice was tight, strained. Is Stephanie there? She's upstairs. Still asleep, I imagine. I need you to wake her up. Now. This is urgent. What's happened? Charles Whitmore invoked the morals clause. He's terminating the association's contract with every single one of his affiliated networks. 63 hospitals, Lawrence. He's pulling everything. Effective immediately. I took a sip of coffee. That does sound serious. Serious. Eric's voice cracked slightly. This is a catastrophe. We're talking about 40% of the association's operating budget. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand perfectly. What's the stated reason? Conduct unbecoming of a representative organization. There's a formal letter, time-stamped photos from last night's gala, witness statements. Lawrence, what the hell happened at that event? I attended. I said simply. My wife told me not to come. She said I would bore her important clients. Charles heard her say it. Silence on the line. Then quietly, oh God, there's more, isn't there? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He's not just pulling his networks. He's filed a formal ethics complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. He's claiming the association has been operating with conflicts of interest for at least 5 years. He's provided documentation. What kind of documentation? Internal emails, meeting minutes, financial records showing favorable treatment for certain pharmaceutical companies in exchange for... Lawrence, did you know about any of this? I set my coffee down carefully. Eric, I'm an antitrust compliance expert. What do you think I've been doing for the last 3 years? Another silence. Longer this time. You're the source, Eric said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're the one who gave him everything. I documented irregularities I observed in my wife's professional conduct. When those irregularities appeared to violate federal ethics guidelines, I did what any responsible citizen would do. I reported them to someone with the authority and resources to investigate properly. Jesus Christ, Lawrence. I need you to wake Stephanie now, Eric said, his voice shaking. The board is calling an emergency session at noon. She needs to be there. And Lawrence? She's going to need a lawyer. A good one. Because this isn't just about losing a contract. The FTC investigation could lead to criminal charges. I'll let her know, I said. I hung up and sat there for a moment, looking at the file folder on my desk. 3 years of careful observation. Emails where Stephanie had directed staff to give preferential treatment to companies that donated to her personal political action committee. Meeting minutes where she'd blocked investigations into billing fraud because it would upset major donors. Financial records showing how she'd used association funds for personal expenses by reclassifying them as business development. All of it documented. All of it time-stamped. All of it delivered to Charles 6 months ago. I heard movement upstairs. Stephanie was awake. I stood, picked up the file folder, and walked to the stairs. She appeared at the top, still in her robe, her hair disheveled, her face showing the first signs of panic. Your lawyer called, I said calmly. He needs to speak with you. Something about Charles Whitmore terminating your contracts. Her face went white. What? He mentioned a morals clause and an FTC investigation. I held up the file folder. You might want to get dressed. You have a meeting at noon. She stared at me, and for the first time in years, really looked at me. Not through me, at me. What did you do? She whispered. I documented the truth, I said. The same thing I've done my entire career. The difference is, this time, it was about you. The emergency board meeting took place in a conference room that smelled like expensive leather and desperation. I wasn't invited, but Benjamin was there. As the association's legal compliance observer, he had every right to attend. He called me at 1:15 p.m., while the session was still ongoing. Dad, he said quietly, his voice carrying that military precision I'd grown used to. You need to hear this. I'm putting you on speaker. Stay silent. I could hear the chaos through the phone. Raised voices, the shuffle of papers, someone's hand hitting a table. This is a disaster. That was Richard Thornton, the association's chairman. We've lost 63 hospital networks in one morning. 63. Our operating budget just dropped by 40%. The issue isn't the budget, another voice said. Margaret Hayes, the ethics committee chair. The issue is why Charles Whitmore felt compelled to invoke the morals clause. That clause exists for extreme circumstances. What did Stephanie do? She embarrassed him at the gala, someone muttered. It's more than embarrassment, Margaret shot back. I've reviewed the formal complaint he filed with the FTC. There are allegations of systematic ethics violations dating back 5 years. Wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, preferential treatment in exchange for political donations. Silence fell over the room. Where did he get this information? Richard asked. According to the complaint, from an anonymous whistleblower with intimate knowledge of the association's operations. I heard Stephanie's voice for the first time, tight and controlled. This is a witch hunt. Charles Whitmore is retaliating because I didn't fawn over him at a gala. That's all this is. Then explain the emails, Margaret said coldly. Explain the financial records. Explain the meeting minutes where you explicitly directed staff to prioritize donors over ethical guidelines. Those documents are taken out of context. There are 47 pages of documentation, Stephanie. Time-stamped, cross-referenced. Someone spent years compiling this. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. I heard Stephanie sharpen take a breath. She was putting it together. I want to know who did this, she said, her voice shaking now. I want to know who betrayed this organization. You betrayed this organization, Benjamin said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. You committed fraud. You put personal gain over institutional integrity. And now we're all paying the price. You don't get to speak to me like that, Stephanie snapped. I'm your mother. And I'm a military prosecutor who swore an oath to uphold the law, Benjamin replied evenly. That oath doesn't have an exception for family. Ma'am. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard cleared his throat. The board needs to vote. All in favor of placing Stephanie Reed on immediate administrative leave, pending the FTC investigation. I counted 7 voices saying aye. 2 abstentions. No opposing votes. The motion carries, Richard said heavily. Stephanie, you're suspended effective immediately. You'll surrender your access credentials, your company devices, and your office keys. Security will escort you out. You can't do this, Stephanie said, but her voice had lost its edge. It sounded hollow now, defeated. We just did, Margaret replied. This meeting is adjourned. Benjamin ended the call. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed with a text from him. She knows it was you. She's coming home. I looked at the file folder on my desk, then carefully closed it and locked it in the safe. Everything was already submitted. Everything was already in motion. Now came the hard part, watching it all play out. 20 minutes later, I heard her car in the driveway. The engine shut off. The door slammed. Her heels clicked up the front steps, sharp and angry. The front door opened. She stood in the hallway, her face a mask of fury and something else. Betrayal. Real, genuine betrayal. It was you, she said. All of it. You did this. Yes, I replied calmly. I did. Stephanie didn't yell. That would have required energy she didn't have anymore. Instead, she stood in the doorway of my study, her designer suit rumpled from hours in that conference room, her makeup starting to break down, revealing the exhaustion beneath. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you broke the law, I said simply, and because you thought I was too irrelevant to notice. I built that organization. I turned it into a powerhouse. You build it on fraud. There's a difference. She moved into the room, her hands shaking slightly. We're married, Lawrence. For 19 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It meant something, I said quietly. Right up until the moment you told me I'd bore your clients to death. Right up until you made it clear that my existence was an embarrassment to your career. So this is revenge. You destroyed my career because I hurt your feelings. I stood, walked to the window. Outside, I could see Amanda's car pulling into the driveway. She'd know by now. The whole firm would know. This isn't revenge, Stephanie. Revenge is emotional. This is accountability. You committed federal crimes. You ruined people's careers to protect yourself. You took money that wasn't yours. The fact that you're my wife doesn't give you immunity. It just means I had access to see what you were really doing. You spied on me. I observed you. Everything I documented came from sources you should have protected but didn't. Your work emails that you left open on the home computer. Your phone calls that you took on speaker while I was in the next room. Your meeting notes that you left on the kitchen counter. You were so confident I didn't matter that you stopped being careful. She sank into the chair across from my desk, the fight draining out of her. What happens now? The FTC investigates. If they find what I think they'll find, there will be federal charges. Wire fraud carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. You'll probably get 5 to 7 if you cooperate. Her face went white. Prison. That's generally what happens when you commit federal crimes. I need a lawyer. Yes, you do. A very good one. The doorbell rang. We both turned toward the sound. Through the window, I could see 2 men in dark suits standing on the porch. Federal agents. Stephanie looked at me, real fear in her eyes now. Did you know they were coming? I knew it was a possibility. She stood on shaking legs. I can't believe you did this to me. I didn't do this to you. I said, my voice harder now. You did this to yourself. I just made sure the truth came to light. The difference is, when you destroy people, you do it for personal gain. When I document the truth, I do it because it's the right thing to do. The doorbell rang again. Stephanie looked at the door, then back at me, and for the first time in years, I saw her see me clearly, not as an accessory or an embarrassment, but as someone who had power she never anticipated. I underestimated you, she said quietly. Yes, I replied. You did. She walked to the front door, straightened her jacket, and opened it. I heard the formal introduction. Stephanie Reed? I'm Special Agent Patterson with the Federal Trade Commission. We have a warrant for your electronic devices and financial records. We'd like you to come with us to answer some questions. I watched from the study as they led her to their car. Amanda stood on the lawn, her face a mixture of shock and something that looked like relief. Benjamin pulled up just as they were putting Stephanie in the back seat. He met my eyes through the window and nodded once. It was done. Not finished, but the machinery was in motion now. And once federal investigations start, they don't stop until they reach the bottom. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and began drafting my testimony for the grand jury. There was still work to do. There was always work to do. But at least now, the truth was moving in the right direction. Amanda showed up at my door 3 days after Stephanie's arrest. She didn't call first, just appeared on the porch at 7 in the morning with 2 coffees and a look that said we needed to talk. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside, let her enter. We went to the study, the same room where I'd compiled 3 years of evidence against her mother. She sat down across from my desk, set the coffees down, and looked at me with those sharp eyes she'd inherited from Stephanie. They suspended me, Amanda said without preamble. HR called yesterday, said it's a precautionary measure while they investigate potential conflicts of interest. I'm Stephanie Reed's daughter working at the American Medical Trade Association. They can't risk the appearance of impropriety. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Are you though? Her voice wasn't accusatory, just curious. You took down Mom knowing it would affect me too. I took down a criminal. The fact that she's your mother and my wife doesn't change what she did. Amanda took a long sip of coffee, then set it down carefully. I've been working there for 6 years, Dad. 6 years of people assuming I only got the job because of Mom. 6 years of wondering if they were right. And you want to know the worst part? What? I'm relieved. Her voice broke slightly. I'm suspended, possibly about to be fired, and part of me is just relieved, because now everyone knows it wasn't just me. It wasn't just paranoia or imposter syndrome. Mom really was cutting corners. She really was breaking rules. And I spent 6 years watching it happen and telling myself I was wrong. I leaned forward. Why didn't you report it? Because she's my mother, Amanda said simply. Because I convinced myself maybe I was misreading the situation. Because every time I questioned something, she'd make me feel like I was being naive or ungrateful. She's good at that, making people doubt themselves. What are you going to do now? Amanda pulled out a folder from her bag, slid it across the desk. I'm going to testify. The FTC investigators contacted me yesterday. They want to know what I observed while working there. And I'm going to tell them everything. I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, meeting notes, documentation of things Amanda had witnessed over the years. Small things that individually seemed innocent, but together painted a picture of systematic corruption. You've been keeping records, I said. Just like you taught me, Amanda replied. You always said if something doesn't feel right, document it. So I did. I never thought I'd actually use it, but she shrugged. Here we are. Your mother is going to see this as a betrayal. I know. Benjamin already told me she's furious that he testified at the board meeting. She called him a traitor, said he chose his oath over his family. He chose his principles over blind loyalty. There's a difference. Amanda nodded slowly. I used to think you were just quiet, that you let Mom run everything because you didn't care enough to fight. But that's not what it was it? No. You were watching, learning, waiting for the right moment. I was doing my job. Compliance is about observation and documentation. I just applied those same principles to my personal life when it became necessary. She always said you were boring, Amanda said quietly, that you didn't have ambition, that you were content to be mediocre. And what do you think now? She looked at me for a long moment. I think you're the most dangerous kind of opponent, the kind people underestimate until it's too late. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Amanda stood, picked up her coffee. I have a meeting with the federal investigators at 10. Thank you for doing what was right, even when it was hard. Amanda, I said as she reached the door, you're not going to be fired. The association needs people with integrity. Once this investigation is done, they'll see that you were trying to do the right thing all along. And if they don't, then you'll find somewhere better. You're talented, principled, and now you have a track record of choosing truth over convenience. That's worth more than any job. She smiled, sad but genuine, and left. Through the window, I watched her drive away. One child who understood. One who'd chosen principle over family loyalty. Benjamin had done the same. Both of my children had looked at the evidence and chosen justice. Stephanie had raised them to be ambitious, but I taught them to be honest. In the end, honesty won. The grand jury convened 6 weeks after Stephanie's arrest. I testified for 4 hours, walking them through every piece of evidence, every email, every financial record that showed systematic fraud. The prosecutors were thorough, asking questions that peeled back layers of deception Stephanie had built over years. When I finished, the lead prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Reeves, thanked me and said something that stuck with me. Mr. Reed, in 20 years of prosecuting white-collar crime, I've never seen documentation this thorough from a civilian. You could have been an investigator. I replied. I just happened to be investigating my wife. The indictment came down 3 days later. 18 counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud, misappropriation of funds. The federal guidelines suggested a sentence range of 7 to 12 years, if convicted on all counts. Stephanie's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutors offered 5 years in exchange for full cooperation and repayment of misappropriated funds. Stephanie refused. She was convinced she could win at trial, convinced a jury would see her as a victim of a vindictive husband. Her lawyer called me, asked if I consider softening my testimony. I told him no. He asked if I felt any guilt about what I was doing to my wife. I told him I felt guilty that I'd waited so long. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for October. In the meantime, Stephanie moved out of our house and into a condo her brother was renting her. The divorce proceedings started, contentious and bitter. She wanted half of everything, claiming she'd supported my career while building hers. Her lawyers discovered that the house was in a trust I'd established 20 years ago, that my investment accounts were separate property I'd inherited from my father, that most of our joint assets were actually my assets she'd been living off of. The shock on her face during that deposition was almost worth the 3 years of silent observation. Charles Whitmore called me on a Tuesday afternoon. The Healthcare Integrity Commission is official now. Senate approved the funding. We start operations in January. Congratulations, I said. I want you to lead it, Lawrence. Not as an advisor. As the director. Full authority over audits, investigations, enforcement actions. You be the most powerful compliance officer in American healthcare. I sat with that for a moment. A year ago, I'd been the man nobody noticed. The boring husband who read too much and said too little. Now I was being offered a position that would reshape an entire industry. I accept, I said. Good. We'll announce it next week. Fair warning. Stephanie's lawyers are going to claim this is proof of bias. That you manufactured this investigation to advance your career. Let them claim it. The evidence speaks for itself. The announcement made national news. Healthcare industry publications ran profiles on me, describing me as a reformer and an ethics crusader. Colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to congratulate me. Universities asked me to speak. My phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days. Through it all, I kept working, kept documenting, kept preparing for Stephanie's trial. Benjamin called me one evening. Mom's lawyer contacted me, said she wants to talk. Family meeting. You, me, Amanda, and her. What did you tell him? I said I'd ask you first. She's still our mother, Dad. She's also a criminal who's trying to manipulate her children into helping her avoid accountability. I know, but maybe we should hear what she has to say. I thought about it. Thought about the woman I'd married 19 years ago. The woman who'd slowly transformed into someone who valued power over principle. The woman who dismissed me as irrelevant until I proved otherwise. Set it up, I said finally. But Benjamin, record everything. She's going to try to manipulate us. I want documentation. Already planning on it, he said, and I could hear the grim smile in his voice. I'll learn from the best. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. I had no illusions about what would happen. Stephanie would cry, plead, try to appeal to family loyalty. She'd claim I destroyed her out of spite. She'd paint herself as the victim. But I had 3 years of evidence that said otherwise. And unlike her, I'd spent those years building a case that couldn't be manipulated or spun. The truth was coming. And this time, nobody could stop it. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Federal courthouse, downtown Washington, with media trucks parked outside every single day. Stephanie's legal team tried everything. Character assassination, claims of spousal privilege, suggestions that I'd manipulated evidence out of spite. None of it worked. The prosecutors presented my documentation methodically. Email after email showing Stephanie directing staff to prioritize donors over ethics guidelines. Financial records proving she'd reclassified personal expenses as business costs. Meeting minutes where she'd explicitly ordered subordinates to bury compliance complaints. Amanda testified on day 7. She walked into that courtroom in a Navy suit, took the oath, and spent 4 hours describing what she'd witnessed working under her mother. The retaliation against whistleblowers. The pressure to ignore regulatory violations. The culture of fear Stephanie had created. When Stephanie's lawyer tried to suggest Amanda was lying to please me, Amanda looked him dead in the eye and said, "My father taught me that integrity matters more than convenience. My mother taught me the opposite. I'm choosing integrity." Benjamin testified on day 9. As a military prosecutor, his testimony carried weight. He described the board meeting where Stephanie had tried to dismiss the evidence as a personal vendetta. He presented additional documentation he'd found in the association's files, evidence even I hadn't uncovered. Stephanie's defense was that she'd been operating within industry standards, that everyone did what she did, that I was a bitter husband manufacturing a scandal. Her lawyer painted her as a successful woman being torn down by a jealous spouse who couldn't handle her success. The jury didn't buy it. I watched their faces during closing arguments. They'd seen the evidence. They'd heard the testimony. They knew what she was. The verdict came back on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on 16 of 18 counts. The courtroom erupted. Stephanie's lawyer immediately moved for a mistrial. The judge denied it. Sentencing was scheduled for 8 weeks later. The federal guidelines suggested 7 to 10 years. Stephanie sat at the defense table, her face blank, as the judge read the verdict. She didn't look at me, didn't look at Amanda or Benjamin, just stared straight ahead as her entire world collapsed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave a brief statement. Justice was served today. No one, regardless of their position or relationships, is above the law. That's all I have to say. Charles Whitmore was waiting by my car. Hell of a day. Yes, it was. The Healthcare Integrity Commission officially starts operations next month. Your office is ready. Staff is hired. We've got a backlog of organizations that need auditing. Good. Let's get to work. He shook my hand, firm and genuine. You did something remarkable, Lawrence. Most men wouldn't have had the courage. It wasn't about courage. It was about doing what was right. That night, I sat in my study with a glass of whiskey and my father's old watch. Benjamin and Amanda came by for dinner. We didn't talk about the trial. We talked about their lives, their careers, their futures. We talked like a family that had chosen truth over comfortable lies. What happens now? Amanda asked as we cleared the dishes. Now I rebuild the system your mother corrupted. I make sure what she did can't happen again. And I teach other people that accountability isn't optional. Benjamin raised his glass. To integrity. To integrity, Amanda echoed. I raised mine as well. To doing what's right, even when it's hard. We drank to that. To principle. To honesty. To the choices that define who we really are. Stephanie would be sentenced in 8 weeks. The prosecutors were recommending 9 years. Her lawyer was still trying to negotiate a reduced sentence based on her age and lack of prior criminal history. It didn't matter to me anymore. The machinery of justice was in motion. My part was done. I'd spent 19 years married to a woman who thought I was irrelevant. 3 years documenting her crimes. 3 weeks watching her face accountability. And now, finally, I could focus on building something better than what she destroyed. 14 months after the gala. That's how long it took for everything to settle. Stephanie was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. She'd serve at least 6 with good behavior. The judge had been harsh, citing her abuse of power and her complete lack of remorse. The divorce was finalized 3 months after sentencing. She got nothing. The prenuptial agreement I'd insisted on 19 years ago, the one her lawyer had dismissed as unnecessary, protected everything I'd brought into the marriage. The house, the investments, the trust funds, all of it remained mine. She tried to claim she deserved compensation for supporting my career. The judge reviewed the evidence and found that I'd actually been the primary financial contributor throughout our marriage. Her salary had gone to her lifestyle. Mine had built our assets. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Amanda got her job back at the association. The new leadership, installed after the corruption scandal, recognized her integrity. They promoted her to senior policy director. She was building a reputation as someone who wouldn't compromise principles for politics. Benjamin received a commendation from the Judge Advocate General for his testimony. His commitment to justice, even when it meant testifying against family, was noted in his service record. He was being considered for a position at the Pentagon. Both of my children had emerged stronger. They'd been tested and chosen correctly. I stood in my new office at the Healthcare Integrity Commission headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Potomac. A staff of 40 investigators and analysts. The authority to audit any healthcare organization in the country. Charles had called it a reformer's dream. I called it necessary work. My first major investigation was already underway. 3 pharmaceutical lobbying groups with patterns similar to what Stephanie had been doing. The documentation was building. The evidence was clear. Some people call me ruthless. Others call me a hero. I was neither. I was just someone who believed that rules applied to everyone, including people I loved. My phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. Lunch next week? Want to introduce you to someone special. I smiled. She was dating a lawyer from the Justice Department. Someone who shared her values. Someone who wouldn't compromise. Benjamin's text came next. Deployment extended 6 months. I'll be home for Christmas, though. Save me a seat at your fancy new office. I would. Both my children would always have a place in my life. They'd earned it by choosing principle over easy loyalty. That evening, I attended a Senate hearing on healthcare reform. I was testifying about the need for stronger ethics oversight. Senator after senator thanked me for my work. They called the investigation into Stephanie's organization a watershed moment for accountability. One senator asked me directly, Mr. Reed, you paid a heavy personal price for doing what was right. Was it worth it? I didn't hesitate. Senator, the price of doing nothing would have been higher. More people would have been hurt. More fraud would have been committed. More trust would have been destroyed. Yes, it was worth it. The hearing room applauded. Not because I was brave, but because I'd stated something obvious that too many people had forgotten. The truth matters more than comfort. After the hearing, I drove home to the house I'd lived in for 19 years. The house that was finally, truly mine. I poured a drink, sat on the back porch, and watched the sun set over the Potomac. Somewhere, Stephanie was in a federal prison, probably still believing she was the victim. Probably still telling herself, I destroyed her out of spite. She'd never understand that she'd destroyed herself. I just documented how. Some men need validation. Some need recognition. Some need revenge. I just needed to know I'd done the right thing. And sitting there, watching the sunset, with my children thriving and my work making a real difference, I knew I had. Stephanie had called me boring. She'd said I'd bore her important clients to death. She treated me like I was invisible. But in the end, the boring guy had outlasted her. The invisible man had been seen by the people who mattered, and the husband she dismissed had proven to be exactly the kind of man this world needed more of. Someone who kept his word. Someone who documented the truth. Someone who wouldn't compromise his principles, even when it cost him everything. That was worth more than any gala. Worth more than any corner office. Worth more than any marriage built on lies. It was worth everything.